Hello and welcome to the Ferg Neal Show podcast, brought to you by my Melbourne International Comedy Festival show, Fergalicious, Trades Hall, 29th of March until the 23rd of April. Tickets in the bio. Fred again will be opening every night of my comedy festival show. Now, I realize that means I'm going to attract a lot of Brunswick Street mannequins coming to the show, but that's a risk I'm willing to take in the name of ticket sales, because ultimately this podcast is a confession. I firebombed Friendlyjordies. Ultimately, you're probably thinking, Ferg, we thought you and Friendlyjordies were semi-friends. We thought that he came to your house. We thought that you guys recorded the podcast together. We thought that you guys shared a cup of tea. We thought that you guys were on great terms. We thought you followed each other on all social media platforms. We thought that there was some rapport and a trajectory towards future collaborations. I agree. But I got a phone call 3 months ago from a guy called John. He called me up. He said, Ferg, I know that you know the Shanks. He said, I want to turn this shanks into some steam char-grilled lamb shanks. I want a bit of Italian seasoning on these lamb shanks. I said, what's in it for me, John? He said, I'm going to give you a lucrative government position in New York City. You might have heard that Jay-Z song about New York City, NYC. He said, I'm going to give you a penthouse. You're going to be paid $700,000 a day. I said, do I need to do a job interview? He said, you don't even need to write a resume. He said, you don't even need to update your LinkedIn. You need to come in with a good attitude and a trail mix, and in New York City, every couple of months, yell out into the abyss, come to New South Wales, and that will count as meeting the prerequisites for the position of being a New South Wales ambassador to America. I said, this position seems a bit unnecessary. He said, yes. He said, yes. You know what was also unnecessary? Punching a Channel 7 cameraman in the face. But we all do things that are unnecessary, but then after you do them, you realize, oh, that was necessary. That guy had it coming for a while. That punch on the Channel 7 cameraman wasn't just a punch on a Channel 7 cameraman. That punch was a punch on the entire media fraternity that let John down. All right, they backed John for 3 years and then they subsided and they turned on him viciously. You know, when you prop up someone for 3 years, knowing that there is some levels of corruption, try not to get demonetized on YouTube, there are some levels of corruption, and then that corruption comes out through a lamb shank on YouTube. Speaking to camera, former model, you think we've been let down here. You know, as the media environment, you feel let down because the media is about covering stuff up. We know that. We know what the media does. All right, we know what they do and how they operate. And I've even got friends who are journalists. I'm like, I know what's up here. I know what's up. All right, they said, Ferg, don't reveal the truth. I said, I'm coming out, you know, and then I just keep making triangle shapes towards it. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, I know what you're up to. I know the Illuminati. You don't have to beat around the bush for me, okay? I know the Illuminati, which comes from the word illuminous, which means to see clearly. And I'm seeing a lot of clearness in your eyes. Maybe it's the drug, but I'm seeing a lot of clearness in your eyes and your pupils are dilating. And then you start realizing, are all journalists on the source? Are all journalists on the source? And when they're not, you know, when they're not dragging a 21-year-old Collingwood footballer through the mud for being on the Whiz Fizz, they're on the Whiz Fizz themselves. And you're like, okay, I think a journalist's like a comma on the end of journalist, Ferg. A journalist's job is to do the most corrupt shit possible, and then when you see that same behavior in another person, you call it out, okay? And it's a level of self-gratitude and it's a level of self-love that you need in order to be able to do that, in order to operate in those two worlds, to be like, all right, I'm doing this unethical thing, but they're doing that unethical thing, so I'm going to call them out for it. It's that type of duality, Descartes would call it, that you need if you want to move forward in this society, because it's treacherous out there. I'm a stand-up comedian in a cost of living crisis. Do you think I like doing this? You think I like being behind the mic and talking to complete strangers every night who cannot appreciate punchlines that have been worked out over 5 years. I did a gig in East Brunswick last week, and it was just all these Nepo babies staring at me from behind their dazed 9-to-5 eyes going, Ferg, what is going on? I said, I'm giving you some truly momentous, transformative shit. And all they could do was sip sangria and pay pass something that was worth $5, but they pay pass for $45. It's a cost of living crisis out there, guys. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get across. At the moment, we have a cost of living crisis because of inflation, which Australian Donald Trump, Mark Boris, says was caused by governments putting too much money into the economy. What Marky Mark actually means is the $40 billion in JobKeeper that went to his corporate friends who lied about their profits and are now the same ones who are price gouging the Australian public out of their livelihoods. He won't say that, though, because he's at the same cocktail parties as those CEOs. And then the RBA governor's genius solution, what he gets paid $1 million a year for, his genius solution to the corporate greed is not to bother curbing these companies, is not to bother calling out these companies who are using their profits and are making a lot of money for shareholders but are causing an influx of inflation and adding to the cost of living crisis for the average Australian. What his solution is, average Australians must sacrifice their wages and houses in order to save the economy that governments and corporations fucked up. That's the solution. It's a real 2008 GFC where all the elites cause this enormous economic problem and the people who pay are always the ones who have nothing to do with it. It's always the ones who don't even know what the average person, like if I think about people who I know in my family, like they're just working and they're going to work and they're getting on the train home and they're exhausted and they're tired. They don't have time to look at the macro factors that are leading to economic crises and costs of living crises. They don't have the time to do that. So a lot of stuff just kind of bubbles below the surface until they have to pay attention to it because what's occurring is so egregious. What's occurring is so wild. It's something that I think we can all get better at, and that is being angry with the Reserve Bank and these corporations. Okay? Because I think ultimately when Friendlyjordies gets firebombed and the Reserve Bank governor stays fire-free, you think, what's going on out there? What's happening? What is going on out there where we have a comedian and political journalist getting firebombed and then everybody else is on $1 million salaries and they're the ones causing this crisis? I did a gig last week that was so bad, I considered quitting the art form of stand-up comedy. It was that level. It was at that point where I looked in the eyes of the audience as I was walking up and I thought, these people don't want to be here. You know when you just have an environment where I don't think these people want to be in this room. I don't think they know that they're at a comedy show. They seem barely awake. I got up on stage. I said, you guys seem like you're being held hostage here. I don't want to do jokes on you guys. I've been working out these jokes for 5 years. Why would I do these jokes on people who don't want to have it? It's like you're at a restaurant and people, they're like, we're not hungry, and you keep serving up your best crudité. You're like, why am I serving up my best crudité when these people aren't hungry? They don't want what I'm producing. It's a wild thing. It's a wild thing, stand-up comedy, because sometimes you have one night where you're like, this is cementing every single bag gig I've ever done. It's made every bag gig worth it. I'm in a room of 200 people. We're having the best time. The serotonin is flowing and we are living our best lives. And then other times you're like, what are we doing? You're not enjoying this. I'm not enjoying this. Why don't we do something more productive? Why are we all in a cellar? Sometimes you got to question what you're doing. You got to step back and be like, we're on autopilot here. I am talking into a mic. You're not enjoying what I'm saying. I'm not enjoying that you're listening to what I'm saying. We have nothing in common. Why are we doing this? What is going on? And recently, the last week, I've quit alcohol, all right, because I want to see what I can do without alcohol. And I'm having these weird flushes of emotion come over me where it's almost like you're 12 years old again and you're at the Melbourne show. You know when you're at the Melbourne show? Melbourne show is like a microcosm for life when you're sober as an adult. Because the Melbourne show, you have good times. You have good times. So you're like, yes, I've got a show bag. I've got a birdie beetle on my left cheek. I'm feeling good. Then you're on the roller coaster. Whoa, this is exciting but scary. And then you get shat on by a donkey because you got too close to the petting enclosure. And you think, what's going on? Life is getting too real. That's what happens when you're sober. Life becomes very real. I miss the numbing. If you're currently drinking and thinking about becoming sober, don't do it. Don't do it. I miss the feeling of being slightly numbed. It's underrated. All right? It truly is underrated. I miss having a drink and going on stage and coming off and being like, I don't know if that was good or bad, but alcohol has put me in a Buddhist state where I feel non-attachment to results and outcomes. That's how I'm feeling. You know, I made a TikTok about Jack Ginnivan that people got angry about because I said, hey, Jack Ginnivan, yeah, he did a bit of whiz fizz at the Torquay Hotel. Okay, which 21-year-old hasn't done that? Which 21-year-old in the country hasn't done that? Yes, he's an AFL footballer, but he's also a 21-year-old kid. All right, and you're putting these punitive measures on him. All these journalists and AFL corporate who are like, oh, we're shocked at Jack Ginnivan. We can't believe that Jack Ginnivan is doing whiz fizz when they're the same guys whose noses have barely dried from the whiz fizz they inhaled the night before. It's like all these elite people are doing the whiz fizz, and then a 21-year-old kid from Bendigo comes down, from Bendigo Secondary College, comes down to this environment that's infiltrated by private school kids and the like, and he does a little bit of blow, and now all these people, all these hypocrites are like, we're gonna ruin his life. We're gonna ruin his life. It's like when someone like goes to jail for doing drugs. You're like, I think his life is made worse by the jail than the drugs. So what are we trying to prevent here? You know, sometimes you need some restorative methods over punitive methods. All right, my mum's a social worker. It doesn't get good when people go to jail. Like, they become criminalized even more. If you can avoid people going to jail, you save the taxpayer money, and you also save a lot of emotional duress for that person's family and that person if you can put them into a health facility. That's what I think. I think ultimately punitive measures are brutal. They're very brutal. And yes, if someone's, you know, I'm talking about minor drug crimes. Someone's trafficking stuff across international borders. You've got to move in. But I think you know what I'm getting at here is that I think it's an interesting thing. I was having a debate with a friend who went to a private school. We're having a conversation. I said, I think I've in a way got an advantage over you because going to a public school, I know how to deal with the public. You know, I feel like if you went to a public school, you know how to deal with the essays, the goths, the jocks, the weird kids, the nerds. You have access to the public zeitgeist that a lot of private school kids don't have. If you went to a private school, you have the disadvantage of only being able to deal with a 1% of the population, often your same sex, your same economic class, and often your same race, if we're being brutally honest. I know a lot of these private school kids will put like someone multicultural on their newsletter, but then you go into these private schools and you're like, okay, this is straight up the great-great-grandson of the great-great-grandson of Sir Douglas Barron or something like that. You know, it's not really teeming with the wider Australian population. And a lot of these powerful institutions have that. You look at Parliament, you look at these massive big private schools. Honestly, when I went to uni at the University of Melbourne, it's quite like that. You know, it is quite like that. Yes, you have international students who are coming in with a lot of money, but it really is just like, oh yeah, my great-great-granddaddy went to this school, you know, which I didn't have because my family moved around a lot. But it'd be kind of cool. I think it'd be kind of cool if you went to the school and there's a teacher there as a bit as, oh, your dad went here. It'd be like, oh, what was it like? Oh, God, no. You know, I just rely on my auntie to tell me stories about my dad. Where she's like, oh yeah, when we were in Phillip Island one time, we were 18, there was a cop walking past on a horse, and the cops used to have this thing on their cop regalia, which said ACAC. And he said, your dad was so drunk. She said, your dad was so drunk. He said, all cops are Kents. He called a cop the C word to his face. And the cop was like, do you want to be in the Phillip Island magistrates on Monday? He said, no. He said, then jog on. You know, it's an amiable relation. He called a cop the C word and he moved on. And I think that's a beautiful society. You know, that is a beautiful place where I think if you have white privilege, you got to use it. You know, if you have white privilege, you've got to call a cop the C word and have no repercussions. Ultimately, you got to use it. You know, if you're white, you're prone to getting sunburnt a lot more. Okay, you got to deal with a lot of sunburn. I've got SPF 50 right now. I'm inside because there's a window next to me and there's a little bit of UV coming onto my cheek. And so I've applied some sunscreen. But I can also go outside and call the cop a C word and probably have no ostensible repercussions. And that is an interesting hierarchical structure that we've built and we've flourished into. Guys, I'm doing a show at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. This podcast is not over. All right. When I stutter, sometimes I'll just end the pod. Stutter, bang, over. You're like, what? Did that just fade to darkness? Come to my Melbourne International Comedy Festival show. Tickets are selling really good. Tickets are selling a lot better than I thought. Is that underplaying myself? You know, I'm like, oh, people, it's good. I've had a dude on the street the other night. He's like, you Fergus Neal? I'm like, yes, I love your videos. I said, I'm doing a Melbourne International Comedy Festival show. Do you want to come down? And he was like, yes. And I was like, sick. And he came down and we had a bloody good time. You know, we had a momentous time, me and this guy. We just chatted. If you see me in public, say good day. I'll say good day back. And then at the end of the conversation, at the end of this nice organic conversation, I'll be like, by the way, I'm doing a comedy festival show. Come down. Is that bad to plug yourself? I mean, you got to sell tickets, don't you? You got to sell tickets. If you guys could come to opening weekend, that would be beautiful. Tickets are only $20 for opening weekend, but that would be so nice. That would be a beautiful thing that we could all come into together and be like, guys, this is the time to be alive. We're at Fergalicious at Trades Hall. Fred again is playing some sweet, sweet tunes, and we are living our best lives. I think that ultimately in Australia, you can tell if someone... There's a weird thing in Australia where, and this is part of my comedy festival show, where, you know, my friend Drew Pavlo, he's an anti-Chinese Communist Party activist. And in Australia, there's this weird thing with China where it's like, there's a lot of racism towards China, you know, and it's hard because the government is a little bit, you know, they're a little bit, the government, you know, there's a few camps out there, if you know what I mean. And I think I've discovered a way to work out if someone's talking about China critically or if they're talking about China racistly. And the way to do that is whether the person says China or China. And that little nuance is how you decipher whether people are talking about something well or whether you're at a pub in Moorabak and someone's like, the Chinese are coming. The Chinese, but if they say, you know, the Chinese, they may invade one, there's a different feeling tone to it, isn't it? And I think as you go out into the world and you talk to your baby boomer families and their parents and your aunties and you know what I mean, the baby boomers don't say China, they say China. They say China, and it's something to be aware of. Once you hear it, you can't not hear it. As soon as someone says China, I'm like, something crazy is coming. The baby boomers are more scared of China than COVID. So when COVID happened and it came from China, they lost their minds. They were like, oh my Lord, what is going on? Are they coming for us? China coming? Did they send a Chinese voice? You know, you're like, it's what's going on? It's like it's very like, you know, Mickey Mouse is speaking to you, but Mickey Mouse has a few prejudices that are never going to be worked out fully. So you don't introduce your family, you know, to someone when you're on the third date. That's the rule of thumb, I think, in Australia. You know, before you see what my family has to say about China, I need you to love me. I need you to love me before I can show you to my family. I think that's a good thing. You know, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. This stuff with the Benchtops killing young tradies it's really reminiscent of asbestos, isn't it? You know, this is tragic. Government keeps open mind on banning Benchtops killing young tradies. It's like, okay, what do you mean you're keeping an open mind about banning Benchtops killing young tradies? Is that the most insane title you've ever heard? Oh, all these tradies are dying who are installing Benchtops. We're thinking about banning them. We're thinking about getting rid of them. You know, they're killing a lot of people. We're thinking about getting rid of it. You know what I mean? It's like when people are dying from guns in Australia. Imagine if someone's like, we're thinking about it. No, you just had to be like, we're getting rid of guns, all right? You guys have been shooting each other a bit too much. We're getting rid of them. We are getting rid of the guns. Maybe we should be getting rid of these bench tops. Okay, this is like, it almost sounds like the ultimatum is like, oh, do you want a nice bench top or do you want a nice young tradie? Is that the ultimatum? Is that the ultimatum? Okay, Health Minister Mark Butler says the government is open to banning construction materials that cause scoliosis. Okay, maybe we just ban it because we don't want scoliosis, Mark Butler. Mark Butler, we don't want scoliosis. Okay, is that all right to say, hey, we don't want scoliosis in the lungs of young tradies. Okay, my brother is a young tradie, and I would appreciate if he wasn't putting in a bench top for someone. You know, I'd appreciate that if he didn't have to die putting in a bench top. That would be nice. Okay, that would be nice. Guys, I'll see you at my Melbourne International Comedy Festival show, Fergalicious. We've got some massive guests coming on the podcast, which I'm excited to show you and excited to interview. My name is Fergus Neal, and this is the Ferg Neal Show podcast.